This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Hello, world, and welcome to a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. Today's sponsor is A2 Hosting. I've been using A2 Hosting solid state hosting solutions for our website at geekleader.com for many years now, and absolutely love their support, their service, and all the features that you get. You get access to cPanel. You get all of the things that you can imagine for a great WordPress experience, including their A2 optimized WordPress, which does extra security checks, extra lockdown. You can lock down your editor file so you can't edit anything inside there. You get alerts whenever there are file changes that are done. You can also do automatic updates, backups, and more with A2 Hosting. So highly recommend it. Go to geekleader.com/A2 to get more information and to sign up for their solid state turbocharged speed hosting today. Again, that's geekleader.com/A2. All right, Geek Leaders, today I'm honored to have Jodi Daniels on the show. She is a certified informational privacy professional. She's also the founder and CEO of Red Clover Associates, where they have helped hundreds of companies create privacy programs and achieve GDPR, California Privacy Act, and USA privacy law compliancy, which is one of the cool things because I'm responsible for all those things in our company, and it's something that we are always focused on and making sure that we are compliant and keeping track of all the changes that are always going on in that space. Anyway, with all that being said, Jodi, welcome to the show.
Well, hi, thanks for having me.
You know what? Before I asked you kind of how you got to where you are today in your career, I did forget to mention two things. One, that you're the author of an Amazon bestseller, Data Reimagined, with your husband, Justin. And you also host a podcast called She Said Privacy, He Said Security, which I think is an awesome title for a show.
Thank you so much. Yeah, a lot of people really like that title. And we are having a lot of fun with the podcast.
Yeah, they are a lot of fun. A lot of work, but a lot of fun too.
That is absolutely true.
All right. With all that being said, if you don't mind, just tell the audience a little about how you got to where you are in your career and what it is that you guys are doing over at Red Clover Advisors, just so we can have some context for our conversation.
Sure. So fun fact is I started my career as an accountant. So I'm a recovering CPA, and I helped companies as a financial statement auditor at Deloitte really understand their financial data, which is, I think, kind of interesting to where I am today. But after that, I did some finance and strategy work at Home Depot, did strategy work at Cox Enterprises, and then got into targeted advertising. So I basically built a targeted ad network, stalked you for cars before Facebook did it. And that's how I got my start in privacy, because people thought, we should really band together as an online advertising industry to prevent government legislation. And I like to say, well, it worked for about 10 years. And I was then responsible for our company's compliance with this new self-regulation that the online advertising industry had put together. I found it really interesting and decided to make it a full-time job. So I then created this full-time privacy role, built a privacy program from scratch, and then moved out into the financial space and went to now a highly regulated environment, which was really interesting as the digital privacy expert. And after 19 years in corporate for large companies, I decided it was time to do something a little bit different. And I ventured into the entrepreneurial world and started my company, Red Clover Advisors. I really saw a need for smaller and mid-sized companies because they didn't have people like me. So big company had a privacy person or privacy team, and many smaller companies didn't have that. And I could see with different privacy regulations coming along at the time when I left, companies were just trying to figure out what this EU privacy law thing that I know we'll talk about called GDPR was. But I really just saw a need to help serve that market where there was either no one paying attention to privacy or maybe just a really small team and they would need some additional support. And that is what we do. We're basically think of us as the fractional privacy operations team. We go into companies where they have no one paying attention to privacy, or they have a small team and they need additional support to sort through the alphabet soup of privacy laws.
Yeah, which is really, I remember when GDPR first came about a couple years ago, and we were going through the process of making sure we were compliant and adjusting things that needed to be adjusted. And we ran into a couple of questions that honestly to date I don't have any solid answers on on it, whether or not we're compliant in these minor areas. But I imagine that's something that happens quite frequently with companies, that there's always like something that's a little outstanding. There hasn't been any precedents set in the legal battles yet. Like for example, we have a branch of our company that's a nonprofit. And with that, we accept donations. And one of the things that we're required is to keep records of who donated for a certain number of years. That's we're responsible by the IRS to keep that information. But there's also that rule where if someone requests to delete their information, we have to comply with that, which gets a little fuzzy.
Indeed, it does. As a non-attorney and just on a podcast, I can't give legal advice.
Exactly.
But
I imagine things like that happen quite a bit, and you guys have to kind of work through that with your clients.
We do. It really boils down to balancing different laws. You have this privacy requirement to not keep data that a company doesn't need with a tax obligation and a tax law. So it's maybe about matching those up. The call I had right before our conversation today was helping a company think through the employee individual rights and what data do you have to keep on current or former employees versus what you don't actually have to keep. So companies really have to understand their data and work with privacy professionals and attorneys to sort through the competing laws to be able to decide what the right answer is.
Yeah. And it gets really tricky, but I imagine it's something that, when you're dealing with it with a company, and once you figure it out, it kind of stabilizes for a little bit, but there's always changes to the laws, and there's always new things coming up. And we have California Privacy Act, which was the kind of the US version of GDPR, as a lot of people call it. What is next from a federal level? Are we seeing any movement or activity for something to happen on the nationwide?
The closest we came to a federal law is earlier this summer. So summer 2022, where we had the ADPA or ADPA. That's however many P's you want to have, the American Data Privacy and Protection Act.
Yes.
It had a lot of momentum. A lot of different states support it. And you also have a number of states who don't, with two big fundamental issues. One is the private right of action and the concern that individuals will just sue companies left and right and be a significant burden to companies. On the flip side, other people feel like if you don't have that, it won't have enough teeth for companies to take it seriously. And the other big sticking point is preemption. As written, the law was basically the ceiling. So a state couldn't have a law that overruled that. And states like California, Virginia, Colorado, Connecticut, and Utah have privacy laws that they've passed and will be effective in 2023. So there were at least 10 different states who had written saying, we think that there should be preemption. Whenever I'm asked this question, I always kind of think of it as like a political dart, because it is truly an unknown if anything will get passed. You have those two very big sticking points, but it's also politics, and people on either side might do something interesting, and we just never know. It's kind of hard to predict. So most privacy professionals would say thoughtful privacy legislation is still several years away. There are a lot of privacy people who like the current law, but it hasn't been passed yet. And so again, it's a little unclear. What I do think we'll see is if it remains unpassed, there are a lot of states that did like it, and they very well might lift it and kind of make it their own for their state. And you might start to see more states introduce a very similar version to that in this next legislative season. Last year, we had more than 25 different states introduce privacy legislation.
Oh, wow.
It'll be a trend that will continue to happen.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a lot more than I thought. So, as a consumer, I think that's great. As an IT or technical professional, we're a team with, we're writing software. We have public-facing websites. We collect data on folks. It gets a little tricky, and it seems like it's going to, increase a lot of our efforts to make sure we're in compliance.
Absolutely. It's a sticky one.
It is. It is. So we seem to be having, as people are becoming more aware of the data that's being collected, and there's a lot more suspicions of, oh, what is Facebook listening to me on my phone and all this stuff. How is it that we can maybe, as a company, build trust with our customers or with people, visiting our websites and help portray, that we are not spying on people?
Well, the laws all require you to have a privacy notice because the point of it is to explain, here's the data that I collect, here's how I use it, here's how I share it, here's what I'm doing with it. And they all say, well, you're supposed to say it in plain English, and be concise, except explain a long list of things with it as well. So if we kind of take the clue from that requirement, it's about being transparent. Now, sometimes just having a privacy notice might be okay, but depending on the kind of data that you have and the product that you're selling or the service that you're selling, I really believe that privacy should be as part of that feature set. You likely on your site are explaining why your product or service is really awesome. And you're thinking about all those customer objections and including them most often in your language. Well, think about when someone is going to give you data. Why might they not give you accurate data? Has anyone listening ever given the wrong phone number or made up an email address? Or if you were asked for income or kids or anything, you didn't give the right answer or you selected prefer not to answer. You did that because you don't trust the company and what they're going to do with that information. If you clearly and in plain language up front say, here, our product and service is really awesome. And by the way, here's what we're going to do with your data. Here's how we treat your data. Here's a dedicated page to privacy and security that use really lovely visuals and articulate, almost think of, the boxes like, I collect this kind of data. I use this kind of data. Here are your choices. Here's why sharing your data is really important. For example, I have a e-commerce company that I'd really like for them to ask me, how old are my kids? So that I could stop getting the nursery emails and just get the emails that I'm looking for. But I don't have that. They just are lumping me in one big pile. Many of our customers want us to give that information, but they don't, because either we haven't asked them or they don't believe that we're going to do the right thing. So it's communicating in a clear way at the time of collection. And then the really important part, you have to actually do what you just said you were going to do. So you can't collect it and say you're going to not use it for any other purpose and then actually go use it for some other purpose. You can't do that.
Yeah, and that's I guess that's one of the tough parts, because one group may collect the data and then someone else may want to use it in a different department, a different area. And if you don't have that good internal communication and good understanding of what you've promised, things could get a little dicey.
And that is why it's really important for privacy to not be stuck in one little corner of a company. Mm-hmm. It is a cross-functional exercise. And people always say, well, so who should own privacy? There's not a perfect answer. My answer is whoever's going to pay attention to it and be able to corral everybody else. Some of my companies, if there's a legal person, it's in legal. If it's large enough, it's in compliance. Sometimes marketing owns it, IT, security, the CEO, the CFO, anyone who's going to just care enough about it to make sure that all the different departments are actually working together.
Yeah, 100%. So one of the ways that some companies have done this is to, bring in someone to help them, or to, hire a chief privacy officer, which is one of the things that I've seen happening more and more. What do you see most companies doing? And at what point does a company know that they're big enough I probably need to have, a privacy department or at least a chief privacy officer kind of overseeing some of this stuff?
When a company has a lot of data that they're processing, and when I mean a lot, it doesn't necessarily have to just be volume. It could be different types of data. They could be engaging in multiple different kinds of marketing activities. They could be collecting with a number of different forms on their website or through an in-person conversation or loyalty programs. There's so many different types of data that's being collected. So when there's a pretty significant and complex type of data stream and life cycle, there's going to be more privacy questions as well, depending on where the company is. And when I mean where the customers are, not where the company is headquarters. So fun fact, privacy laws follow where the people are, not where the company is headquartered. And as you expand,
I want to I want to ping on that in just a second.
Sure.
Put a pin in that one, but keep going.
So I think we have to understand where the company is located. So potentially Jodi's in Georgia. Jodi has no privacy laws that I have to pay attention to, but I expand over to California. Now I'm going to expand over to the EU. Well, that's two big privacy laws that I have to expand and I have to pay attention to. So as a company starts to get more mature, and potentially you could be B2B listening and you're like, all my B2B clients are in the US. That is lovely. Your B2B clients might require you to comply. As you start to have more and more privacy questions, that's where you really have to expand the maybe part-time person to maybe it's a part-time privacy expert outside your company. When that seems to start getting, a little bit, the volume of work there is picking up, or you're finding more and more internal questions, then maybe you need to have someone more full-time internally owning that, in addition to someone on the outside who will be your privacy expert. It's all a matter of balancing. And some people like the approach of outsourcing different departments. Other times people want to own that internally and have outside perspectives. Some people just want to build a complete internal team. So there's really not a perfect answer to that, other than really understanding the data in your company and the questions that your customers are asking, where your company is headquartered, to make sure that you're meeting obligations, you're building that trust with customers that we just talked about, and you're able to keep ahead of the very fast pace that privacy is finding itself in today.
Okay. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So one question back on like the data privacy laws following the customer. How is that enforced if, let's say you're a small business with just, a dozen employees or so in the United States, but you sell products all over the world and you violate something, a GDPR law, because customers that purchased, are in the EU somewhere, let's say they're in France and they bought something and they asked to be removed and then you didn't comply and, now you're in trouble. How do they have jurisdiction and what kind of efforts could be made to enforce those laws?
Well, that's kind of the same issue with all different types of international laws. These are complex situations, but let's inverse that a little bit and not look at it only from a fine point of view. If I'm Jodi, the customer, and I go to your site and I'm expecting a privacy notice that tells me what you're doing, you don't have it, and your answer is, well, I don't have to. No one will find me. From a customer's point of view, and I asked you on that, and that was the answer a company actually provided, what would be my thought as a customer? I'm going to think, well, you don't care enough about me. Let's put that out actually in even broader context. There are companies who offered some of these individual rights, some of these privacy rights, like the right to delete my information, to people that they didn't have to. Jodi in Georgia, for example, because Jodi in Georgia has no privacy rights. If Jodi asks the company, I want to know what data you have on me, I want to know how you're using my data, I want you to delete my data. And if the answer to me is I don't have to because there's no law there, Jodi, the customer, is going to be really unhappy. So what you're seeing is companies actually adhere to these laws for everybody because it's the right thing to do. So yes, there's these fines. You have international laws that and kind of compliance issues that come around. From a state perspective, you have to comply with laws in that state. Jodi in Georgia, if I have someone, if I do business in California, I have to comply with all the business rules in California for my kind of business, my size, all those things. That's just the way it operates here in the States. So it's important, I think, for people to realize, yes, there's fines. And just like every other law out there, you might get caught. You might not. Which risk do you want to take? Do you want to be the company that doesn't want to adhere to privacy laws because you just don't like them, you just don't want to, you just don't think they're going to come after you, or instead you want to do it because it's the right thing to do, because that's the kind of business and ethics and standards that you want to hold to. And that's what your customers, whether they're consumer or B2B, will hold you to. And in the B2B market, I will be honest, it is, in my opinion, the vendor pressure that are actually making many companies comply.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I know there's a lot of companies, us included, whenever we get a new vendor, we ask for, documentation on their privacy. We ask for documentation on their security and the cybersecurity, and make sure that they're in compliance with what we are, expecting and hold to our standards. So whenever you're getting those quotes back and you ask for that information, if they don't have it readily available, then, a lot of times that vendor's, off the board. And another thing that I like to think about is whenever you're looking at privacy, I imagine one strong piece of advice, this is advice that I got, was to look for where your customers are and what's the most strict privacy and try to make sure you adhere to that for everybody. That way you're in compliance with all of the other rules that come about that may be a little less strict, but also you're giving every customer that same, quality of care of taking care of their privacy and showing them that, it doesn't matter to us if you're in, Georgia, as you said, or in California. We're gonna hold all customers equal.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I'm always asked this question, and there's certainly some truth to trying to find that most restrictive piece. It does throw some monkey wrenches for some parts of an organization, and they might need to make some different choices. The other thing is really important to know which laws you have to adhere to, because you can't actually just pick one and think it will work for all of them. You actually have to look at each of the different laws and kind of line them all up and pick the most conservative piece of each law, because some of the laws are nuanced and different enough where that actually matters.
Yeah. I guess you're absolutely right on that. So, I have a couple of questions about your book. And to start off, let's just look at the cover. You have a butterfly on the cover, and I want to know what was the idea behind that, and where did the name Data Reimagined come from?
So the butterfly is the idea of transformation. And with the title Data Reimagined, it actually dovetails really nicely with what we just talked about. We firmly believe it's not just about the need to comply because there's a law. We do think you should do that because there's a law. And to avoid fines, because we don't really think companies want to spend money on fines, but really because we think it's an opportunity. We've talked about trust. Right now, it's a big differentiator because not everyone is doing it. So there's still time for it to be an advantage above your competitors. And in the future, it'll just be table stakes. It'll just be, this is the way it's going to be done. And with so much data that is around today, you have, quintillion bytes of data. Companies are collecting data in every nook and cranny of their organization. They're responsible for that. And we want people to understand it's not just complying with the law. It's not, because that's almost like the bare minimum. And it's also not just something that they can ignore anymore. Because when you really begin to understand the data, in my example, I want to give data to a company so that I get better marketing. I'm deleting half of the emails, and maybe there's something good inside because I'm tired of getting them all mixed together. So I want to give a company my data. I want a personalized experience. And from a security point of view, the more data companies collect that they don't need, the more at risk they are. Now you have an entire other world. This conversation is really focused on the privacy side, but as a part of privacy is security. So again, if you have all this data and there's a data breach, you're now responsible for all of that. So the idea is transforming the way people think, transforming the way privacy and security are considered, to really flip the conversation from just this, I have to this, I get it. I'm connecting with my customers. I'm building trust. I want to give them my business. I want to give them my data.
Yeah, absolutely. So whenever a customer, one of the things you mentioned is that, trust with businesses is pretty much at an all-time low. Once a customer or a business has lost trust with customers, how hard is it, or what are some ways that they can get that back?
It is super hard to try and earn it back. If you think about just personally, if you've done something to someone else just on a personal standpoint and you violated their trust, what do you have to do? You have to kind of slowly earn it back. You have to do nice things for them again. You have to show them and kind of go above and beyond and make it up in some way. Show that you can be a great friend. So here, show that you can be a great company. Be able to also start in bite-sized pieces. Maybe ask for just a little bit of information and be able to try and repair that. If you think to some of the really big data breaches, for some of the companies, they're so fundamental to the organization or to society. A whole bunch of people didn't totally stop shopping at Target, but they might have changed how they paid at Target. And then what did happen? Target changed their card readers so that everyone had a different way. They enhanced their systems to show, here's how we care about it. Their privacy notice was completely enhanced. The way they reviewed all their vendors and internally, they enhanced. And the same is true for many other companies. So here you have to understand whatever happened and violated the trust and rebuild all of that, communicate what has happened, and then you got to start small.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And, Target's a great example of how they did, make some changes in order to show that, we're taking this serious. We're not, faking it or anything like that. And just recently, one of the companies that comes to mind whenever I think of, data breaches is Uber. They've had some, a bad track record about, customer data and more importantly, reporting that loss of data. And recently I think it was their CISO just got sentenced because of not failure to report the crime of their data breach. Is that something we're going to see more and more of?
It's a little hard to predict. I do think we're a really litigious society. I think we're also a quick to blame society. And that's pretty unfortunate because these are big processes that are involved. They involve multiple different people, and one particular person can't solve everything for the organization. It really needs to be a leadership down activity with processes and policy and training all throughout as well.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think it's one of those things that it's the company as a whole, but it's got to start at the top with the leaders, pushing things down. I know one of the things that we've, I'm sure a lot of people are doing this too, is corporate training on GDPR and California Privacy Act. And you obviously have your cybersecurity awareness training and things like that, but just continuously reinforcing and reminding people of how important it is and what is PII and, how we need to protect that data if we get it. It's very, very important to us.
Exactly.
So another thing in your book, you talk about making a mindset shift and of how of when you're collecting customers' data and paying attention to that. What do you mean by that? And what should we try to do?
Companies collect data because they think, I need this data for me. I need to know more about my customers so that I can sell more to them. The flip side is I need to ask customers for the data that I need to better serve them. I need to ask only what's going to be really valuable to them. I firmly believe we should put the customer first and make sure everything that we do in all aspects, not just privacy, is tied back to the customer. And then if we start to look at it from that point of view, privacy isn't, again, just this annoying compliance thing. Instead, it's just a natural next step to understanding what the customer needs so that we can best serve them. I mean, after all, every company, not nonprofits, but companies are here, most of them, to make money. They're here to sell something, to sell a good, a service, to solve a problem, fill a desire, some want. And if we're only focused on ourselves, that can be pretty transparent and not come across properly. If instead we're really focused on well, what would be helpful to them? And if we think about all those objections of why might I not buy the product and service, well, the trust angle is one of them again. So when we kind of flip it to that, privacy can help me sell my products and services. I say this all the time, but I literally was in a conversation in a roundtable with marketers last week. And I was so excited when I had a marketer at a large organization say, I have to include privacy in all of my marketing. I have to make sure that I get across why companies can trust us, because that is important to the market that we serve. And so we're hearing more and more of this need for customers to want to trust companies. And it's all through the language and how that data is used. And when leaders inside a company can understand that, that is the mindset shift that we need, as opposed to just, I need a privacy notice. I need to just have a strong password and I'm going to do the bare minimum and I'm all set.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the way you're talking about how can this benefit the customer, and how can we show that us collecting certain pieces of data is important for the customer experience. And I think Microsoft and Apple have done a really good job on their privacy to show, like, the advertiser ID whenever you're signing in for the first time. Do you want to allow this because it'll help target ads to you, but yet keep your privacy in place? And Apple shows, how you can like create an account without using your real email, but have things forwarded automatically for privacy sakes, and little things like that show you that they're taking this seriously, and they're showing you how, giving a little bit of data here and there is important to customizing that experience to making it better for you, but we'll keep everything anonymous for you.
Right. I mean, if you think about anyone going to the doctor's office, if you go to a solo doctor's office, they have HIPAA requirements. If you go to a large hospital, they have the same HIPAA requirements. You don't go to the small doctor's office and say, you know what, that's okay. You can just take my data and share it on social media. You can do whatever you want with it. You can keep all the files out and open so everyone can read them. I'm okay with that. No, you have the exact same expectation as you do as the large hospital. And if you went to a doctor's office and they didn't care about your privacy, or they asked you to fill out a Word document, or had all the files all over the place, you probably would kind of question, who is this, right? Or can you imagine the open office environment move to the open doctor environment? No one would ever do that because it's private. It's all about understanding that it's data's personal to the individual. And people want to trust who they are, whether it's health data, financial data, my shoe size, or my favorite activities. That is my information that I'm entrusting to you. And I want to make sure that I can do that.
Yep, absolutely. All right, I want to shift gears for just a second, and I want you to tell me, what was it like to write a book and be on a podcast with your husband? How has that maybe helped your relationship, or what are some of the interesting tidbits that you noticed doing something like that?
People love asking this question. If you ask him, he is going to be like, my second book is going to be how I survived my marriage by writing a book with my wife. The truth is, we talk about this stuff all the time, which is kind of how the podcast came to be, because we were doing a lot of thought. We don't work together. So for anyone listening, he is an attorney at a large law firm, Baker Donaldson. I have my own consulting company, so we don't work together. But because some of his work had security and my work is all privacy, and he found it really interesting, we were just doing a lot of thought leadership. We would present together at conferences and webinars. And then COVID happened, and some people got COVID puppies and COVID bred, and we did a COVID podcast. So that was kind of like the natural evolution. And then from there, we just had all these conversations and thought, we are saying similar concepts all the time. We see the missing piece in the marketplace where people are just still very focused on the bare minimum. There's this law. One, it's confusing what you need to do, why it matters. We see this huge evolution in data, and we just saw need, and we wanted to be able to articulate that. Because we've done so much of this thought leadership together, we did the podcast together. After this recording, we're recording a podcast together. It was just really the next natural thing. If you asked our kids, they're really tired of hearing us talk about privacy and security. But we did actually have a conversation at dinner the other night about, what do you do if you get a link in your email And our youngest daughter was, no, we don't click on it. They could get bad stuff. So to anyone listening, don't click the links on emails that you're not familiar with, because the child is telling you that could be a phishing email. So our kids are really well versed now in privacy and security.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing to talk about. And it's also important for, I think, all parents to share that information with their kids. I know my daughter just got her first phone with a phone number the other day, and she's, obviously getting some spam calls and text every now and then. And I was like, whenever you get those, don't reply, don't click the links, don't do anything, block the caller. Here's how you do that. And, explaining some of the, basic privacy etiquette when it comes to phones.
Exactly. It's critical. And I have a huge passion for protecting kids in the digital age. So we dedicate a number of our podcasts to that very concept. I help and support a nonprofit here in Atlanta that actually serves nationwide on a variety of different materials to help people. It's called Savvy Cyber Kids. Anyone interested? It's a wonderful nonprofit with a ton of free information out there to protect your kids. And you can help you too.
I think that's awesome. Yeah. And one of the reasons why I ask about the whole podcast and writing with your wife is or your spouse. My wife also works in tech. So we talk about tech stuff all the time. And I'm sure our kids are just as annoyed by it as yours are. So I think that's really awesome that you guys were able to do that during COVID.
We have survived. It can be fun.
This has been an awesome conversation. Jodi, how can people connect with you online and find out more about the things that you're doing and pick up a copy of your book?
The best place is to redcloveradvisors.com. So our website. From there, you can grab a copy of the book. You can listen to the podcast, and we have tons of free resources that are over there. And then on social, I am best found on LinkedIn. So I post a ton, lots of content, and I really enjoy connecting with people. So I'd love to see you in either of those places.
Awesome. And I'll link all that up in the show notes, as well as your podcast and a copy and a place where they can pick up a copy of your book. Jodi, thanks so much for coming on. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about privacy today.
If you enjoyed that episode, please leave a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. I'd greatly appreciate that. And also, don't forget to check out merch. We have some t-shirts that I've designed that are on at geekleader.com. You can click on the merchandise section there and check that out. And also, don't forget about the books from our guests. So if you like this guest and other guests that have written books, please go ahead and check that out at geekleader.com. I would greatly appreciate it, and I'm sure they would too.